The biting wind of the northern territories was said to freeze a man's lungs before he even realized he was dying. But as the heavy iron gates of the Frostmarch citadel groaned open, the cold settling into Seraphina's bones had nothing to do with the winter air. It was the heavy, suffocating aura of 1,000 apex predators. She stepped out of the wooden carriage, her midnight blue velvet gown dragging softly against the snow-dusted cobblestones. Beneath the heavy layers of silk and restrictive corsetry, a small leather flask rested secretly against her ribs. It was empty now. She had swallowed the last bitter drops of monk's hood poison hours ago, dulling her supernatural senses, masking her true scent under the harsh odor of ash and copper. She was a prisoner in her own body, chaining the beast inside her to survive. Standing at the top of the grand obsidian staircase was King Darien. He was a terrifying marvel of lethal grace. Taller and broader than any man she had ever seen, the Frostmarch Warlord radiated a dominance that felt like a physical weight pressing against her throat. He wore a dark gray steel chestplate, a heavy fur cloak draped over his broad shoulders. His silver-white hair caught the pale moonlight, but it was his eyes that made Seraphina's breath catch. They were the color of glacial ice, cold, calculating, and entirely devoid of warmth. He did not look at her like a groom receiving his bride. He looked at her the way a conqueror surveys a newly acquired, fragile piece of land. Seraphina kept her chin level. She did not lower her gaze, nor did she tremble as she ascended the steps. Whispers rippled through the gathered pack. They did not bother to lower their voices, assuming the human bride was too deaf to hear their mockery. A political pawn, a scarred warrior muttered. She smells of dust and dead flowers. A stiff wind will break her, another sneered. Standing near the king was Lady Isolde, a high-ranking noblewoman of the council. Her lips curled into a disdainful smirk as Seraphina approached. Isolde's amber eyes flashed with raw hostility, assessing the petite bride with predatory amusement. She made sure her voice carried. "Welcome to the real world, little human. Try not to bleed on the stone. It is difficult to wash out." Seraphina did not give Isolde the satisfaction of a reaction. She walked past the sneering woman and upped before the king. "Your Grace," she said softly, her voice steady and layered with a quiet dignity. She offered a customary shallow bow. Darien did not extend his hand. His jaw was locked, his ice blue eyes narrowing slightly as he studied her pale, stoic face. His highly trained senses picked up the faint, bitter scent of ash radiating from her skin, a stark contrast to the sweet perfumes human women usually drowned themselves in. His inner wolf stirred, pacing restlessly in the back of his mind. It was an irritating sensation. He had conquered kingdoms, yet this fragile human standing before him made the beast within him inexplicably anxious. "The claiming begins now," Darien stated, his voice a deep, vibrating baritone that echoed off the black stone walls. He turned, leading her into the grand banquet hall. The massive chamber was illuminated by hundreds of tallow candles, casting elongated shadows over the heavily armored warlords and council members. At the center of the room stood an altar of ancient black marble. The high priest of the Frostmarch pack, a blind elder draped in gray furs, stepped forward. This was no human wedding of soft vows and delicate rings. This was a territorial pact. The elder produced a thick, braided cord of pure silver. Seraphina's heart hammered against her ribs, panic piercing through the numbing fog of the monk's hood. Silver. To a human, it was merely cold, heavy metal. To a werewolf, prolonged contact was pure, searing agony. It burned through fur, flesh, and bone. She had prepared for the cold, for the isolation, and for the cruelty. She had not prepared for this. "Give me your hands," the elder commanded. Darien extended his right hand, his expression entirely unbothered. His thick leather bracer protected his skin from the metal. Seraphina had no such armor. Her delicate lace cuffs were pushed back, exposing her bare, pale wrists. She took a slow, shallow breath, burying the wild, primal urge to run deep into the vault of her mind. She extended her left hand, letting it rest against the warlord's calloused palm. The elder began to wrap the silver cord tightly around their joined wrists. The moment the metal pressed into her bare skin, a localized fire erupted along her veins. Seraphina bit the inside of her cheek so hard that the metallic tang of fresh blood flooded her mouth. The silver seared her flesh, a vicious, burning sting that threatened to break her composure. Her dormant wolf howled in the dark, clawing desperately at the poison in her blood, trying to heal the damage. She did not flinch. She did not whimper. She stared blankly at the blind elder, her face a perfect porcelain mask of indifference, even as the skin beneath the silver began to blister. Beside her, Darien frowned. The Frostmarch king stood perfectly still, but his eyes suddenly darted to the side of her face. His nostrils flared. Beneath the heavy scent of roasted meat and pine needles in the hall, he smelled something incredibly sharp. Copper, salt, fresh blood, and beneath that, a strange, burning odor that made his chest tighten. He looked down at their bound hands. He searched her features for any sign of distress, any trace of the fragility his pack had mocked. He found nothing, only a cold, regal stillness that rivaled his own. When the elder finally removed the cord to seal the pact, Seraphina discreetly slid her hand back into the folds of her heavy velvet skirt, letting the cool fabric soothe the burning red welts on her wrist. She had survived the claiming, but as Darien's intense, calculating gaze lingered on her, his wolf pacing wildly beneath his skin, Seraphina knew the poison in her veins was failing. The real battle was only just beginning. The feast that followed the claiming ceremony was a chaotic display of primal indulgence. The grand banquet hall echoed with rowdy laughter, the clashing of heavy silver goblets, and the tearing of roasted meat. To the wolves of Frostmarch, this was a celebration of their king's expanding territory. To Seraphina, it was a gauntlet. She sat at the high table to the right of King Darien, her posture rigidly perfect. Beneath the table, her left hand was hidden deep within the heavy folds of her midnight blue velvet skirt. The silver burns on her wrist throbbed with a relentless, searing heat. Her dormant wolf, enraged by the injury, was throwing itself against the fading barriers of the monk's hood poison. Her right hand rested in her lap, her fingers lightly brushing the small, hidden leather flask. Empty. There was nothing left to quiet the beast clawing at her ribs. She had not touched the plate of roasted venison before her. She drank only water, terrified that the strong northern ales might interact poorly with the remaining toxins in her blood and trigger a premature shift. A few seats down the high table, Lady Isolde lounged with her loyalists. The noblewoman's amber eyes tracked Seraphina's every subtle movement with predatory amusement. She raised her goblet, her voice slicing clearly through the din of the hall. "The human bride eats like a sparrow," Isolde mocked, drawing the attention of the surrounding warlords. A low murmur of cruel laughter rippled through the pack. "Tell me, Lady Seraphina, do you plan to survive the harsh northern winter on breadcrumbs? Or will the king have to assign a wet nurse to ensure his fragile prize does not blow away in the wind?"
Yes.
The hall went terribly quiet. The pack waited, hungry to see the frail human break, expecting tears or a submissive lowering of her head. Darian did not intervene. He sat back in his massive carved chair, his strong fingers wrapped around his drinking horn. His ice-blue eyes slid toward his bride, watching her with intense, calculating silence. He wanted to see how the pawn played the board. Seraphina slowly turned her head. She did not shrink under the collective stare of 100 apex predators. Her dark eyes met Isolde's amber gaze with a chilling, deadpan calm. I find that those who gorge themselves callously are often the first to grow slow and heavy, Lady Isolde. Seraphina replied, her voice smooth and carrying effortlessly over the silent room. In my homeland, we prefer to keep our wits sharp. A heavy stomach makes for a dull mind, and a dull mind is easily hunted. Isolde's smirk vanished. Her eyes flashed with a dangerous golden light, her canines subtly elongating in a visceral reaction to the insult. The surrounding warriors shifted uncomfortably. No human dared to speak to a high-ranking northern female with such disguised venom. Before Isolde could snap a retort, Darian set his heavy drinking horn down. The dull thud echoed like a gavel. She speaks the truth, the Alpha King stated, his deep voice carrying an undeniable finality that immediately silenced any further murmurs from the pack. He did not look at Isolde. His gaze was entirely locked on to Seraphina. For the first time since she had stepped out of the carriage, Darian saw the spine beneath the velvet. She was not a weeping pawn. She was a woman trapped in a den of monsters, yet she refused to play the victim. His wolf, which had been agitated all evening, suddenly let out a low, approving rumble in the back of his mind. The scent of copper and ash surrounding her seemed to sharpen, vibrating with an invisible tension. Seraphina held the king's gaze for a fleeting second, acknowledging his subtle defense, before looking away. Her chest tightened uncomfortably, her vision blurred for a fraction of a second, the edges of the room tinting with a faint, luminous gold. The poison was breaking down faster than she had anticipated. The pain from the silver burns was accelerating her metabolism, burning through the monk's hood. She needed to leave the hall. She needed the freezing isolation of her chambers before her true scent broke through the ash. But the fates, it seemed, had a different plan. A sudden, chilling gust of wind swept through the grand banquet hall, extinguishing the candles near the entrance. The heavy oak doors groaned, but they did not open naturally. They were kicked inward with a deafening crack. The atmosphere in the room instantly shifted from rowdy celebration to lethal, suffocating tension. Out of the shadows of the corridor stepped 5 men cloaked in tattered gray furs, their faces hidden beneath iron masks. The scent that flooded the hall was not the familiar, structured musk of the Frostmarch pack. It was foul, feral, unwashed and reeking of desperate bloodlust. Rogue wolves, assassins. "Protect the king!" a guard roared, drawing his broadsword. But the intruders moved with terrifying, unnatural speed, completely bypassing the scrambling perimeter guards. They did not look at the council. They did not look at Lady Isolde, who had strategically stepped back into the shadows. Their eyes were locked entirely on the high table. The chaos erupted in a fraction of a second, shattering the illusion of Frostmarch's invulnerability. The 5 rogue wolves did not waste time shifting into their beast forms. They moved on 2 legs with terrifying, supernatural agility, vaulting over the long wooden dining tables as the pack erupted into a frenzy of shouts and drawn steel. Plates shattered. Goblets of ale spilled like dark blood across the stone floors. "Hold the line!" a warlord bellowed. But the intruders were incredibly coordinated. 3 of them engaged the royal guards, creating a brutal bottleneck of flashing swords and claws, while the remaining 2 vaulted directly toward the high table. Their target was the king. Darien did not wait for his guards. The Frostmarch Warlord kicked his heavy carved chair aside, his ice-blue eyes narrowing into lethal slits. His hands elongated, thick, razor-sharp claws extending from his fingertips as his alpha aura exploded outward, a crushing wave of dominance that made the very air in the room vibrate. He lunged forward to intercept the first assassin, but the rogues had come prepared for a monster, not a man. The lead assassin reached into his tattered cloak and hurled a heavy, weighted net perfectly over Darien. It was not made of ordinary rope. The thick fibers were interwoven with silver wire and thoroughly soaked in highly concentrated wolfsbane extract. The moment the net slammed into Darien's chest and shoulders, the toxic fibers burned through his armor and seared his skin. The Frostmarch king let out a guttural roar of pure agony, temporarily blinded and painfully restricted. The wolfsbane acted as a paralytic, attacking his heightened nervous system and forcing him to one knee as he desperately tore at the burning mesh with his bare claws. It was a cowardly, highly calculated trap. And it worked. With the Alpha King hindered, the second assassin leaped onto the high table, kicking aside platters of roasted meat. He drew a long, serrated silver dagger, his feral eyes locked onto Darien's exposed throat. The strike was perfectly angled, a downward executioner's blow that no struggling man could dodge in time. Seraphina watched the blade descend. In that microscopic sliver of time, the world seemed to slow to a crawl. Her heart pounded against her ribs, but it was no longer the frantic rhythm of a terrified human. It was the deep, measured drumbeat of an apex predator waking from a long, enforced slumber. The adrenaline flooding her veins finally incinerated the last lingering traces of the monk's hood poison. The heavy, invisible chains around her soul snapped. She saw Lady Isolde watching from the shadows, her lips parted in eager anticipation. If Darien died tonight, the council would seize control. Isolde would rule. Seraphina would be executed as a useless widow. She was done playing the pawn. Seraphina moved, the years of rigorous human conditioning, the endless days of drinking ash and copper, shattered in an instant. Her reflexes flared to life with blinding, lethal grace. She did not scream. She did not call for the guards. She threw her own body between the assassin and the kneeling king. She raised her left arm, the heavy midnight blue velvet of her sleeve catching the downward strike. The serrated silver dagger sliced cleanly through the expensive fabric and bit deep into the pale skin of her forearm. The force of the assassin's blow should have easily shattered a fragile human woman's bones, but Seraphina's muscles hardened with supernatural density. She held completely firm, absorbing the impact like solid iron. The rogue's eyes went wide in shock beneath his iron mask. For a split second, he stared at the petite human bride who had just halted his full-body strike without giving a single inch of ground. That hesitation, that was his fatal mistake. With a sharp, violent twist of her wrist, Seraphina grabbed the assassin's arm. She used his own downward momentum against him, twisting his elbow until a sickening crack echoed over the table. The rogue gasped, his grip failing. Before the silver dagger could clatter to the table, Seraphina snatched it from the air with her free hand. She drove the hilt upward in a clean, clinical strike, embedding the silver blade deeply under the rogue's ribs. The assassin choked on his own breath. He collapsed backward off the high table, hitting the stone floor with a lifeless thud. Silence slammed into the immediate vicinity of the high table, a stark contrast to the battle still raging in the lower hall, where the guards were finally subduing the remaining rogues. Seraphina stood over the fallen assassin, breathing heavily. The silver dagger was still gripped loosely in her right hand. Below her, Darien finally ripped the last of the wolfsbane net from his shoulders. His chest heaved, the toxic burns on his neck already smoking as his alpha healing kicked in. He slowly stood up, but he was not looking at the dead rogue. His ice blue eyes were locked entirely on his bride. Seraphina was standing tall amidst the ruin of the royal feast. The torn silk of her midnight blue sleeve fluttered slightly in the draft. A thin line of blood ran down her forearm where the silver blade had struck her. But as Darien watched, his breath catching in his throat, the deep, bleeding gash stopped bleeding. The flesh began to knit itself back together at a terrifying, flawless speed. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. The skin smoothed over perfectly, leaving no scar, no trace that the human bride had ever been injured. Only the blood staining her torn dress remained as proof of the violent strike. And then, the scent hit him. The bitter, unappealing odor of ash and copper that had surrounded her all evening was gone. It had burned away completely. Flooding the space between them was an intoxicating, overwhelming fragrance of night-blooming jasmine, ozone, and the electric smell of a wild storm. It was not the scent of an omega. It was not the scent of a human. It was a scent that bypassed Darien's rational mind and struck directly at his most ancient, ancestral instincts. His inner wolf stopped pacing. It pressed its metaphorical head to the ground in absolute reverence. The Frostmarch king stared at the woman he had claimed in indifference, the realization dawning in his glacial eyes that the creature standing before him was far more dangerous than the assassin sent to kill him. Move. The command was a barely contained snarl. Before the rest of the Frostmarch pack could fully comprehend what had just transpired at the high table, King Darien grabbed Seraphina's wrist, the one unburned by the silver cord, and pulled her away from the carnage. He did not treat her with the fragile care owed to a human bride, nor did he drag her like a prisoner. His grip was an iron vice, his strides long and urgent, forcing her to keep up as he bypassed the scrambling guards and pushed through the heavy oak doors behind the throne. They entered the private royal chambers, a cavernous, freezing room lit only by the low embers of a massive stone hearth. The moment they crossed the threshold, Darien slammed the heavy doors shut, dropping the heavy iron locking bar into place. The sounds of the chaotic banquet hall were instantly muffled. Darien backed her until her shoulders hit the cold stone wall. He did not strike her. He did not draw a weapon. He simply planted his massive hands on the stone on either side of her head, trapping her in a cage of raw, suffocating alpha dominance. "What are you?" Darien demanded. His voice was a dangerous, vibrating rumble that rattled the crystal goblets on a nearby table. Seraphina did not cower. Her chest heaved, her breath coming in ragged gasps, as the dormant predator inside her stretched its limbs for the first time in a decade. The agonizing heat from the silver burns on her other wrist was finally fading, replaced by a surge of intoxicating, boundless energy. The scent in the room was shifting rapidly. The bitter, ashen disguise of the monk's hood poison was entirely gone. Flooding the cold chamber was a fragrance so rich, so overwhelming, that it made Darien's vision swim. Night-blooming jasmine, ozone, the electric, heavy air that precedes a violent thunderstorm. It was a scent that commanded immediate obedience. A human does not heal from a silver blade in 3 seconds, Darien continued, his ice blue eyes blazing as he leaned closer, scanning her face. A human does not possess the speed to disarm a feral rogue, and a human certainly does not carry a scent that makes my inner wolf want to bare its throat. Seraphina looked up into his eyes, refusing to flinch under his suffocating aura. If she was going to die tonight, She would die as a sovereign, not a terrified pawn. "I am the weapon the Southern Lords didn't know they possessed," Seraphina replied. Her voice had changed. It had dropped an octave, layered with a faint, guttural resonance that made Darian's pupils dilate. "They believed they were trading a bastard human daughter for your mercy. They only knew I had to be kept quiet, kept drugged. If they knew what I really was, they would have slaughtered me in my crib to prevent a challenge to their own petty thrones." Darian's gaze dropped to the torn silk of her midnight blue sleeve. The fabric was ruined, stained with her blood, but the skin beneath it was flawless. He looked at her collarbone, where the restrictive velvet bodice had shifted during the scuffle. Without asking for permission, his sharp claws effortlessly hooked the edge of the torn fabric at her shoulder. He pulled, snapping the heavy seam with a sharp tear, exposing her upper chest and collarbone. Seraphina gasped, instinctively stiffening, but Darian did not touch her skin. He froze. The great, terrifying conqueror of the North stopped breathing. There, etched perfectly into her pale skin just below her collarbone, was a deep, iridescent birthmark. It was the shape of a waning crescent moon, surrounded by an intricate crown of thorns. It pulsed faintly, reacting to the sudden rush of her true nature. Every werewolf pup was taught the ancient legends before they were even taught how to hunt. The legends of the First Era, before the pack splintered into warring factions. The mark belonged to the Valyrian lineage, the first werewolf queen, the progenitor of all alpha bloodlines. Her descendants were considered myths, a royal dynasty wiped out centuries ago during the Great Purge. To see that mark in the flesh was to gaze upon a living deity. "The blood of the first," Darian whispered. The lethal fury bled out of his expression, replaced by a profound, earth-shattering realization. He slowly released his cage, taking a step back as if he had just realized he was standing too close to an open flame. His mind raced, calculating the staggering political implications. If the Council of Northern Alphas discovered her identity, it would trigger a civil war. Every warlord would either want to kill her to secure their own rule, or capture her to legitimize their claim to the absolute throne. But as Darian looked at her, radiant, defiant, and vibrating with suppressed power, the mating bond that had been buried under her poison finally snapped into place. It hit him with the force of a tidal wave. His inner wolf did not just recognize a queen, it recognized its other half. "You poisoned yourself," Darian said softly, the harshness leaving his voice as he looked at the red, blistered silver burns on her left wrist, the ones she had silently endured during the ceremony, just to maintain her cover. "You drank monk's hood every day to hide your scent. You let my pack humiliate you." "I did what I had to do to survive," Seraphina snapped back, the anger she had swallowed for years finally breaking free. Her human brown eyes flickered, bleeding into a brilliant, luminous gold that illuminated the dark room. "I saved your life tonight, King Darian. Do not make me regret breaking my cover to do it." Darian stared at his human bride, the reality of her words settling over him like a heavy mantle. The pack had called her their biggest shame. They had mocked her fragility. They had no idea that the mother of their species was standing right in their halls. The heavy silence in the room stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the crackle of the hearth. Darian remained perfectly still, his massive frame rigid as he processed the luminous gold staring back at him. Seraphina pulled the torn edges of her midnight blue bodice together, her movements slow and deliberate. She did not try to cover the crescent moon mark again. The time for hiding in the ash was over. The dormant power radiating from her skin was undeniable. commanding the very air in the cold stone chamber to bow to its weight. Darian took a slow step back, giving her the physical space she commanded. It was an instinctual gesture of respect, one his dominant alpha nature had never freely offered to anyone. "You burned yourself," Darian said, his voice dropping to a harsh, strained rasp. His ice-blue eyes flicked to her left wrist, where the red, blistered flesh from the silver claiming cord still marred her pale skin. She had suppressed her healing factor intentionally, letting the metal sear her to the bone just to maintain the illusion of a fragile human. "You let the high priest bind you with silver, and you did not make a sound." "It was the price of survival," Seraphina answered coldly. "A weeping human bride is an annoyance. A werewolf immune to silver is a threat to the throne." Darian's jaw clenched. The realization of what she had endured under his roof struck him like a physical blow. The absolute certainty of the warlord fractured, replaced by a heavy, grinding sense of accountability. "I let them mock you," Darian admitted, the words tasting like gravel. He looked at the floor, his broad shoulders tensing. "At the high table, Isolde called you worthless prey, and I let it happen to see how you would react. Their mockery meant nothing to me," Seraphina said, stepping away from the stone wall. She stood tall, her spine perfectly straight. "But your silence did. A king who allows his court to humiliate his own is a king who breeds treason. I did not step in front of that silver blade out of duty to a husband who watched me burn. I did it because Frostmarch will devour itself if you fall, and I refuse to be collateral damage in Isolde's game." The reprimand was sharp, unapologetic, and entirely accurate. Any other wolf in the Northern Territories would have had their throat ripped out for speaking to the Frostmarch Warlord with such insolence. But Darian did not growl. He did not let his pride cloud his judgment. Instead, the cold king closed the distance between them. He did not trap her this time. He moved deliberately, ensuring she could see his hands. Gently, with a carefulness that seemed impossible for a man built for slaughter, Darian took her injured left hand. Seraphina tensed, her golden eyes flashing a warning, but she did not pull away. Darian looked down at the blistering burns. His thumb lightly brushed the uninjured skin near her palm. His inner wolf, usually a creature of war and blood, let out a soft, low whine of distress at her pain. The intoxicating scent of jasmine and ozone wrapped around them, tightening the mate bond that Darian had been too blind to see through the poison. "You are no one's collateral damage," Darian vowed, his deep voice carrying a solemn, unshakable weight. He lifted his gaze, meeting her brilliant golden eyes. "I am a warlord, Seraphina. I have conquered with fear because it is the only language the North respects, but I was blind to the true queen standing in my own hall." He released her hand, taking a step back and bowing his head, a gesture of profound submission that the Alpha of Frostmarch had never shown another living soul. "You are not a prisoner here. Not anymore," Darian stated. "Whoever let those rogues into the banquet hall possessed the security codes to bypass the outer wards. The assassins were meant to kill me, but the wolfsbane net was a distraction. They wanted you dead in the crossfire to sabotage the peace treaty. And there is only one woman in this court, desperate enough for the crown to risk treason." "Lady Isolde," Seraphina supplied, her voice dropping into a lethal, quiet register. Darian nodded, his aura darkening with murderous intent. "She thought eliminating you would force me to take her as a mate, to stabilize the pack. I will tear her apart for this. No, Seraphina interrupted. The golden light in her eyes flared, ancient and commanding. If you kill a high-ranking noble without undeniable proof, the council will turn on you. Isolde is cunning. She will have a scapegoat. Before Darian could respond, a frantic, heavy pounding echoed against the thick oak doors of the chamber. "My king!" The muffled voice belonged to Commander Kale, Darian's most trusted guard. The urgency in his tone was unmistakable. Darian strode to the doors, lifting the heavy iron bar and pulling one side open just enough to see his commander. "Report." Commander Kale looked pale, his eyes darting nervously toward the shadows of the room where Seraphina stood. "The rogues have been subdued, but Lady Isolde has invoked the ancient law. She has summoned an emergency tribunal in the Obsidian Amphitheater." Darian's eyes narrowed into glacial slits. "On what grounds?" "She claims she has proof, Your Grace." Kale swallowed hard, dreading the words. "She claims the human bride orchestrated the assassination attempt. The council is demanding Lady Seraphina be handed over for the fire." "The fire?" Darian repeated, his voice dropping into a register so dark and lethal that Commander Kale visibly paled. The warlord of Frostmarch turned toward the heavy doors, his massive frame radiating a murderous intent that threatened to crack the stone beneath his boots. "I will mount Isolde's head on the citadel gates before I let her leave. A single torch." He reached for the iron handle, ready to unleash a bloodbath in the council chambers, but a delicate, firm hand pressed against the center of his chest. Darian stopped. He looked down. Seraphina stood before him, the torn edges of her midnight blue gown framing the faint, iridescent glow of the crescent moon mark on her collarbone. Her golden eyes were entirely calm, possessing the deep, calculating stillness of an ancient sovereign. "If you slaughter a high-ranking noble to protect a human bride, the council will brand you a tyrant bewitched by the enemy," Seraphina said quietly, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Isolde has orchestrated this perfectly. She wants you to lose your temper. She wants the pack to see you choosing a southern pawn over the safety of your own people. It will fracture Frostmarch, and she will step into the ruins as the savior." Darian's jaw locked. His inner wolf growled, hating the political reality of her words. But he knew she was right. "I will not let them touch you, Seraphina. That is not a political promise. It is an absolute." "They won't touch me," she replied, her lips curving into the faintest shadow of a smile, a predator's smile. "A king who shields a traitor loses his crown. Do not fight this battle for me, Darian. Stand beside me and let them see exactly who they have summoned to their trial." Darian looked at the quiet confidence radiating from her. For a decade, she had survived by playing the invisible, docile human. Now she was choosing to step into the light. He gave a single, slow nod, stepping back to let her lead. The Obsidian Amphitheater was a terrifying marvel of ancient architecture, carved directly into the sheer mountain cliff. Tiered rows of black stone seats rose in a steep circle around a sunken central floor. As Darian and Seraphina entered the chamber, the heavy iron doors groaning shut behind them, the sheer volume of aggressive energy in the room was suffocating. Hundreds of massive warlords, pack elders, and seasoned warriors filled the tiers. The air was thick with the scent of anger, fear, and bloodlust. Standing in the very center of the pit was Lady Isolde. She wore a tailored gown of crimson, looking every bit the victorious conspirator. In her hands, she held a heavy leather pouch, the supposed undeniable proof of treason. As the Alpha King descended the stone stairs, the murmurs of the pack died down into a tense, heavy silence. Darian took his place on the elevated throne of iron and bone carved into the wall of the pit. But he did not command Seraphina to stand behind him. Seraphina remained on the floor of the amphitheater, standing completely alone in the center of the hostile pack. Her midnight blue velvet gown was torn at the sleeve, stained with dried blood, her hair falling loosely over her shoulders. To the unobservant eye, she looked like a ruined, fragile thing. Isolde scoffed, stepping forward, her amber eyes practically glowing with triumph. "You bring the traitor before us without chains, my king?" Isolde challenged, her voice ringing loudly so the highest tiers could hear. "This human conspired with rogue mercenaries. We found this pouch on the body of the assassin who died at the high table." Isolde threw the leather pouch onto the stone floor. It burst open, spilling heavy gold coins stamped with the crest of the Southern Lords, Seraphina's adoptive family. An aggressive murmur swept through the warlords. "She paid them to strike at you, to weaken our borders," Isolde accused, pointing a sharp, perfectly manicured finger at Seraphina. "She is a spy, a disease sent to rot Frostmarch from the inside. The ancient law dictates that treason against the Alpha King is punishable by the fire. We demand justice." The pack erupted into a chorus of deep, terrifying growls, stamping their heavy boots against the stone. They wanted blood. They wanted the human burned. Darian sat upon his throne, his elbows resting on his knees. He did not issue a command to silence them. He did not defend his bride. He simply watched, his ice-blue eyes fixed on Seraphina, waiting. Seraphina did not flinch at the deafening noise. She slowly looked down at the gold coins scattered on the floor, and then she looked up at Isolde. "Gold coins," Seraphina spoke. She did not shout. She did not raise her voice to be heard over the roaring pack, but there was a strange, dual harmony in her tone, a guttural, vibrating resonance that seemed to bypass the ears and strike directly at the genetic memory of every wolf in the amphitheater. The growling abruptly ceased. A sudden, uncomfortable silence fell over the massive chamber as the elders in the front rows instinctively leaned away from the petite woman. The air pressure in the room began to drop. "You forge a lazy assassination attempt, plant Southern gold on feral rogues, and expect the Alpha King to execute his bride without question," Seraphina continued, taking a slow, deliberate step toward Isolde. "You speak of treason, Lady Isolde, yet you forget one crucial detail in your frantic grasp for a crown." Isolde's triumphant smirk faltered. Her inner wolf suddenly whined, a bizarre, involuntary reaction to the scent of jasmine and ozone that was rapidly filling the sunken pit. "What detail, you miserable human?" Isolde sneered, trying to mask the sudden tremor in her hands. Seraphina stopped just inches from the noblewoman. The golden hue beneath her brown eyes finally shattered its disguise, blazing with terrifying, luminescent brilliance in the dim light of the amphitheater. "A human," Seraphina whispered, her voice echoing off the black stone, "cannot kill an armed lichen rogue with her bare hands." Isolde stared at the human bride, the words echoing in the silence of the sunken pit. "A human cannot kill an armed lichen rogue." The noblewoman's amber eyes darted from Seraphina's calm, glowing golden gaze to the torn sleeve of her midnight blue velvet gown. Through the jagged rip in the fabric, there was no bloody gash. There was no broken bone. There was only flawless, pale skin. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through Isolde's arrogance. The scent of jasmine and ozone was no longer just a strange underlying odor in the room. It was a suffocating, heavy blanket that made her own wolf whimper in the back of her mind. The realization that the king's bride was not a pawn, but a predator who had personally butchered her assassin, shattered Isolde's fragile composure.
Liar!
Isolde shrieked, the polished veneer of a high-ranking noblewoman dissolving into pure, feral desperation. She did not wait for the council to deliberate. She did not look to King Darien for permission. Driven by the terrifying instinct of a cornered animal, Isolde shifted. The transformation was violent and instantaneous. Her crimson gown tore into shreds as her body expanded, bones snapping and reforming into the massive, furred shape of a direwolf. With a vicious snarl that sprayed saliva across the black stone floor, the beast lunged directly at Seraphina's throat, aiming to tear the truth out before it could fully take root.
"Seraphina!"
A warlord shouted from the tiers, not in defense of the bride, but out of sheer shock at the breach of council law. Seraphina did not flinch. She did not raise her arms to protect her face. She simply let go of the invisible chains she had held onto for an entire decade. She opened her mouth, and from her throat came a sound that defied human biology. It was not a scream. It was a command. A deeply resonant, vibrating roar that carried the accumulated weight of 1,000 ancient queens. It bypassed the ears of the wolves in the amphitheater and struck directly at the marrow of their bones. Submit. It was the biological imperative, the absolute, unyielding law of the first bloodline. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic for Isolde's pride. The massive wolf was caught in midair, a few feet from Seraphina, but the command slammed into her like a solid wall of iron. Isolde's own biology betrayed her. Her muscles seized, her spine forcing itself downward as the primal instinct to grovel before the sovereign overrode her conscious desire to kill. Isolde crashed violently onto the stone floor at Seraphina's feet. The sickening crack of the beast's jaw hitting the obsidian echoed through the chamber. The false noblewoman whimpered, her massive body trembling uncontrollably, pinned to the ground not by magic, but by the crushing, localized gravity of a true alpha's dominance. She could not lift her head. She could not bare her teeth. She was entirely, pathetically paralyzed by her own DNA. But the command did not stop with Isolde. The shockwave of Seraphina's unleashed aura rolled upward through the tiered seats of the amphitheater. The legendary warlords of the north, men who had slaughtered rival packs, conquered freezing mountains, and laughed at the human bride just hours ago, were hit by the same undeniable force. A chorus of startled gasps and involuntary, fearful whines filled the air. One by one, heavy boots scraped against the stone. Thud. A scarred pack elder dropped to his knees, his hands trembling as he pressed his forehead against the cold rock. Thud. Thud. Entire rows of Frostmarch warriors collapsed. Their pride fought against it, their faces straining with the effort to remain standing, but their inner wolves recognized the genetic signature of their creator. To stand before the first queen was an act of biological defiance their bodies simply would not allow. Within seconds, the entire obsidian amphitheater, hundreds of the most lethal predators in the known territories, was forced into a position of absolute, groveling submission. The pack that had called her worthless, that had demanded she be thrown into the fire, was now kneeling in terrified silence before the hem of her torn velvet dress. The only lichen left standing in the massive chamber was King Darien. The warlord of Frostmarch stood before his queen from throne. He felt the immense, staggering pressure of her aura, a weight that would have crushed a lesser alpha. But the mate bond, the ancient, fated connection between equals, shielded him from the command's absolute submission. His wolf did not cower. It resonated in perfect, harmonic alignment with hers. He watched her, his ice-blue eyes wide, his chest heaving with a mixture of profound awe and burning, possessive pride. Seraphina slowly lowered her gaze to the trembling, whimpering form of Isolde at her feet.
You called me a disease sent to rot Frostmarch, Seraphina said, her voice soft, but echoing with terrifying clarity in the perfectly silent room. You demanded I be given to the fire. You thought I was a fragile pawn, Lady Isolde. She stepped closer, the toe of her delicate slipper resting inches from the dire wolf's snout. But you forgot the old laws of the blood, Seraphina whispered, her golden eyes blazing like twin suns in the dark pit. The North belongs to the crown, and the crown belongs to me. The silence in the obsidian amphitheater was absolute. It was not the tense, expectant quiet of a courtroom waiting for a verdict. It was the suffocating, heavy stillness of a world that had just stopped spinning. At Seraphina's feet, the massive direwolf that was once Lady Isolde lay paralyzed, whimpering softly against the cold black stone. The noblewoman's ambition had been shattered, not by a blade, but by the undeniable, biological truth of the first bloodline. Seraphina did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Her words carried through the immense chamber, striking the ears of every kneeling warlord and elder. You brought false gold and forged lies to this sacred floor. Seraphina spoke, her golden eyes sweeping over the bowed heads of the Frostmarch Council. You sought to manipulate the Alpha King and fracture the North for your own vanity. A true leader sheds blood to protect their pack. You were willing to shed the pack's blood to protect your pride. She looked down at Isolde. The pressure of the biological command eased just enough to allow the beast to shift back. Isolde's bones cracked and reformed, leaving the disgraced noblewoman sobbing on the floor, stripped of her torn crimson gown and her dignity, shivering in the freezing air of the pit. I could have you executed, Seraphina stated coldly. But the blood of a traitor is too foul to stain the floor of this amphitheater. Lady Isolde, you are hereby stripped of your titles, your lands, and your rank. You are banished from the Frostmarch Citadel. If you are found within the borders of the North by the next moonrise, you will be hunted not as a wolf, but as rogue prey. Isolde choked on a sob, her face pressed to the stone. She could not argue. She could not demand a trial by combat. The biological weight of the sovereign's decree made the very thought of rebellion impossible. Seraphina turned her gaze to the royal guards, who were kneeling near the iron doors. With a subtle flare of her golden eyes, she lifted the command from them. Take her out of my sight. The guards scrambled to their feet, their expressions a mix of profound awe and deep terror. They practically sprinted down the steps, dragging the weeping Isolde away by her arms. The heavy iron doors slammed shut, sealing the traitor's fate. When the echoes of the closing doors faded, Seraphina slowly turned to face the rest of the amphitheater. The pack remained on their knees. These were warriors who had laughed at her. They had called her a fragile pawn. They had demanded she be thrown into the fire. Now, the weight of their profound collective regret filled the chamber. Some of the oldest elders wept silently, overwhelmed by the presence of a living deity they had so deeply disrespected. They waited for her judgment. They waited for the queen to demand their blood for their cruelty. But Seraphina did not punish them. She simply withdrew the crushing weight of her aura, pulling the intense biological pressure back into her chest. The oppressive gravity vanished, leaving the scent of jasmine and ozone lingering softly in the air. "Stand," she commanded softly. The warlords hesitated, their bodies trembling as they slowly rose to their feet. They kept their heads bowed, none daring to meet her luminous gaze. The humiliation they had inflicted upon her was now their own burden to carry. From the elevated throne carved into the stone wall, a heavy set of footsteps echoed. King Darien descended the stairs. The Frostmarch Warlord moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his ice-blue eyes fixed entirely on his bride. The pack parted for him, stepping back to give the Alpha King the floor. Darien stopped before her. He looked at the torn sleeve of her midnight blue velvet gown, the dried blood from a wound she had taken to save his life, and the iridescent crescent moon mark that glowed faintly on her skin. He did not look at her as a prize to be claimed. He looked at her as his equal. In front of the entire Northern Council, the most ruthless conqueror in the known territories did the unthinkable. Darien unfastened his heavy fur mantle and let it fall to the stone. He lowered his massive frame, dropping to one knee before the human bride they had all mocked. He took her uninjured right hand in both of his, bowing his head as he pressed his lips reverently to her knuckles. "My mate," Darien vowed, his deep voice vibrating through the silent chamber, cementing an unbreakable bond that the fates had written in the stars. "My queen. The throne of Frostmarch does not define you, Seraphina. You define it. My life, my pack, and my sword belong to you." Seraphina looked down at the king kneeling at her feet. The decades of hiding, the bitter taste of poison, and the agonizing heat of the silver cord finally washed away, replaced by the warmth of a true protective bond. She gently touched the side of his scarred face, the golden light in her eyes softening to a warm, human brown. The era of division was over. The ancient bloodline had returned, and together, the Cold King and the First Queen would forge an empire built not on fear, but on absolute, untouchable truth. A crown can be stolen, and an identity can be hidden, but true power and a fated bond cannot be buried forever. Do you think the Frostmarch pack truly deserved her mercy after they demanded she be thrown into the fire? If you loved seeing this fragile bride rise from the ashes to become the untouchable queen, and enjoyed the protective devotion of the Alpha King, make sure to subscribe. Stay with us and come back for more emotional stories of rejected mates, hidden truths, and royal justice.